At the reading of the will, my children leaned in like it was a lottery. I folded my hands and let the lawyer speak. The room went silent when he reached the final page, the condition. None of them met. If you're watching this or reading, this wherever you are, on a bus with the city rattling past you, lying on your bed with the fan ticking overhead, standing in a kitchen where tea is boiling and the smell of cardamom is in the air, tell me where you are right now. Type your city or your street or the place you're sitting, because I want to picture you as I tell you this. I want to see the room you're in the way I saw that room. The long table, the heavy curtains, the framed paintings of birds and boats, the old clock with a tired tick and my children on the other side of the mahogany, leaning forward as if my life savings were numbers on a spinning wheel. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. I folded my hands so they wouldn't tremble. And from the first word, I knew how this would go, because I had known my children long enough to know what they wanted. And it wasn't me. I had asked for the conference room with the big window because my wife, God rest her, loved sunlight. She believed sunlight made people tell the truth, that it burned off the fog between hearts. She would stand on the balcony in the mornings and say, "Let light in, and darkness will find another door." The sun did come in, a warm sheet over the table, but it only made the dust shine on the air and draw a sharp line across the faces of my children. Ethan sat in the middle, the way he always sat, as if he had claimed the center of the world by birthright. On one side of him was his wife, Alina, wearing a perfume so cold it reminded me of a winter elevator. On the other side sat my daughter, Mara, who kept tucking hair behind her ear and glancing at her watch. My youngest, Jonah, scrolled his phone under the table and slipped it into his pocket whenever he felt my eyes. I recognized the look on their faces. It was the look people wear when a waiter comes with a tray, and they believe the plate with the largest portion is already theirs. Ethan smiled the way men smile at real estate listings. Alina held a pen in both hands as if it were a baton she would use to conduct a victory. "Let's not make this dramatic," she said to the room without looking at me. "Father is only being practical." That was the first cut of the day, her casual voice, like a blade that had been sharpened on small remarks for years. I didn't answer. I looked at their hands, and at the rings they wore, and at the watches that cost more than the first car I ever owned, and I thought of the night I sold my only gold chain to pay the last term's fees because Ethan said the exam would change his life. The lawyer cleared his throat and began the formal language. Paper rustled, the clock clucked. A pigeon walked on the window ledge and tilted its head as if it too wanted to hear the outcome. "Pursuant to the last will and testament of..." He read my full name and my father's, and the dates that now felt like a corridor I had walked down for 70 years. My wedding date floated up in my mind as if it had been called by the clock. The smell of marigold, my wife's trembling laugh when her veil caught on a nail, the way she looked at me later as we washed rice together in the kitchen and said, "Whatever happens, we'll face it, and we'll not bow." I held on to that voice the way you hold a railing in the dark. Ethan leaned toward the table and tapped his finger in a soft, impatient rhythm. "We know the broad strokes," he said. "The villa, the apartment building, the old orchard land, the accounts." He turned to me then. A quick glance. A son visiting his father's face the way a stranger glances at an old house and wonders how soon it will be torn down. "We can discuss valuations later," he added. "The market is in our favor. You did well holding." He said it like praise and like accusation. He said it like he had done the holding. I could have told him about the nights I kept the lights off and sat with my calculator while my wife ironed shirts that were not ours for money that didn't go far enough. But I didn't. I could have told him about the year the manager ran away with our savings, and I took a job sweeping a warehouse at dawn while pretending to him that business was steady, that the world was fair, that if he studied and if he wore good shoes, the floor would always be beneath him. I didn't tell him those things. I just watched his mouth, the confident way it shaped the future, as if the future were already signed. The lawyer kept reading. Specific bequests, charitable donations. A list of the people to whom I owed small debts and gratitude and the debts I considered the same. My children's impatience went through several stages: polite, restless, irritated, offended. "This is unnecessary detail," Alina said under her breath. "We know the core." Jonah sighed and tried to keep it quiet and failed. Mara cleared, her throat as if a speech were lodged there and the world was wasting her time. I remembered her at 7, crying because she couldn't tie a ribbon, and my wife whispering, "Slow down, little star, slow down," and guiding her fingers through a knot that would still sometimes come loose. There was a time when we ate dinner together in the same room and nobody looked at a screen. Ethan would complain about a teacher, and my wife would put more rice on his plate and say, "Don't complain, conquer." Mara would bring a drawing of a deer with a red scarf and tell us the story she had invented to explain why deer need scarves. Jonah would fall asleep in his chair and wake with his cheek printed by the weave of the table runner. If this is nostalgia, then let it be nostalgia, because it breathes and it hurts and it asks, what happened between then and this room? When did they learn to lean forward for money and not for me? It started small. It always does. After their mother died, grief came like static, a noise nobody could switch off. We tried to speak through it. They were grown, and their lives were big, and their calendars were important. Calls turned into texts. Texts turned into emojis. Visits turned into quick drop-ins with car engines still warm. The house changed its sound. I learned to make my tea for one. I learned to say, "No hurry," when there was a hurry. The betrayals were not all loud. They were sometimes a door unlatched, a promise delayed, a birthday greeting that felt like a payroll acknowledgement. But a few were loud enough to ring. On his 32nd birthday, Ethan invited me to a restaurant that had too many mirrors. He arrived late with his in-laws and told me, with a cheerful kindness that felt like a glove, that the villa would be better in his name now, for speed. He said it like a logistics decision, like I was a delay. "You'll still live there," he added, and his wife nodded, already rearranging my furniture in her mind, already deciding where the art would hang. I remember the way the water tasted that night, flat, as if it had given up on being water. There were other moments. The day Alina changed the gate code and said, "Security updates, Father, you know how it is," and then forgot to share the new code for 3 weeks. The evening I knocked at Ethan's door with a warm pot of dal, and heard laughter inside, and waited in the corridor because they were in the middle of something. The Sunday Mara texted, "Can we skip today? I'm exhausted," and then posted photos from a brunch 20 minutes later. The time Jonah asked for a small loan, and when I asked when he might return it, he said, "You don't need it." I learned to be quiet. I learned to be still, but stillness is not surrender. Stillness is sometimes where a plan begins. It was my wife who taught me the power of the quiet plan. She handled things you would not have seen. "Don't fight air," she would say. "Hold the seed." When she got sick, she pressed my hand and said, "Promise me you will protect the heart of this family." I promised, and I did not know then how far I would have to go to keep that promise. It took years and a safe I kept too well and a trust I disguised as a tax strategy and a condition written in a will that would not show its face until a room like this one had gathered to see. If that sounds dramatic, then it is only because love makes quiet plans that look like drama when they finally walk into daylight. The lawyer paused and looked at me for a moment as if asking, "Are you sure?" I nodded. "The bulk of the estate," he continued, "is to be governed by a family trust established 5 years ago." Ethan frowned. "What trust?" he said. "I manage all Father's documents, and I would have seen—" He stopped, realizing even as he spoke that he did not manage all my documents, and the certainty slid out of his voice like a drawer that had been opened too far. "Go on," Alina said, leaning in, the pen now still in her hands. "We'll handle it, whatever structure he's chosen. The assets are the assets." Yes, the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses again. The assets are the assets, and the conditions are the conditions. He turned the page. Paper whispered. The room creaked. Outside, a motorcycle went by with a loud burst and faded into the city. What comes next was a single sentence in the document, one line that held, "The past, the hurt, the promise, and, if I am honest, my tired hope. No distribution shall be made to any child," the lawyer read, "who in the 2 years preceding my death has failed to demonstrate, in deed and not in speech, respect and care for me as a father. Nor to any child whose conduct toward me has been neglectful, exploitative, or demeaning. This shall be determined by the trustee based on evidence, witnesses, and the written record." He read it slowly, each word like a small door opening, and when he finished, he let the silence sit. It sat. It was heavy. It was sunlight and dust and my wife's voice. Let light in. Ethan laughed, but it was a laugh that didn't know where to go. "What does that even mean?" he asked. "Demonstrate care? You were fine. We checked on you. We had a driver on call." He looked at me for support like a man showing his ticket at a gate. "Tell him," he said. "Tell him we did what we could." I did not speak. Alina filled the space. "We threw you a birthday dinner," she said. "We got you a smartwatch. We told you you should move to a smaller place because it would be safer. We were concerned. We said so." She looked at the lawyer as if the tone of concern could be notarized. The lawyer slid a folder across the table. It was thinner than a life, but thicker than a lie. "The trustee will make that decision," he said, "based on this." Ethan didn't touch it right away, as if paper could burn. Mara reached for it first and opened it, and I watched her eyes move, catch, move again. Inside were things nobody wants to read about themselves, dates and transcripts. Photographs I had not taken, but others had. Recordings of conversations in which my children had said words I could not forget, even when I tried to. There were statements from neighbors who had watched me wait outside my son's gate with food. From caretakers who had called and been told next week. From a nurse who had heard me say, "It's all right, they're busy," as if that sentence could be medicine. Jonah pushed back his chair. "This is an ambush," he said. "Who collects this? Who spies like this on their own family?" I looked at him, and I allowed the first sharp line of the day into my voice. A father who learned he was being turned into a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved, I said. My voice did not rise. It didn't have to. It arrived and it sat and it stayed. A father who knows memory is a soft witness. A father who remembers a promise. Alina reached for the folder and scanned and went still. The date of that night at the restaurant was there, with the part where Ethan had said for speed, recorded by the same waiter who had served us and had told me later. "Sir," it didn't sound right, and who had given me the words, as if he were returning a wallet to its owner. There was the message where Mara had written, "Can we skip today?" Seconds before geotagging a brunch table with bottomless mimosas. There was the security camera clip from Ethan's building lobby, my shoulders slightly rounded, the pot in my hand steaming through the towel, the doorman apologizing because the intercom was not answered. None of this was illegal. It was not a courtroom. It was a life room. It was the record of what had been built and what had been dropped. Ethan leaned back as if the chair had become narrow. "You're petty," he said, but the word was too thin for the shape of his fear. He looked at the lawyer. "And this clause, this condition, what, we have to prove we loved him?" He said, "Love like a receipt. You have to demonstrate respect and care," the lawyer said. "In deed, not in speech." He folded his hands, mirroring mine. "In the past 2 years, the trustee will decide." Ethan glanced at me, and for a moment I saw the boy who had clung to my leg on his first day of school, begging me not to leave him. I didn't enjoy the glimpse. It hurt. "The trustee?" Mara asked. "Who is the trustee?" Her voice had a crack in it now, a thin line like the first fissure on ice. The lawyer closed the folder and put his palm on it as if it were a sleeping bird. "Your father," he said. "Your father is the trustee." He let the sentence rest in the room the way a judge's gavel rests in the air before it falls. He may choose to appoint a co-trustee at his discretion, but the decision is his. He retains control. Jonah laughed too quickly. So this whole thing is just, he keeps everything and gives us chores. He gets to punish us for living our lives. He looked at me and tried to find the edge where anger might hook. You won't do this, right? You won't actually do this. I felt a strange calm then, like a bridge receiving the weight it was built for. I already did it, I said. I did it because I watched you all audition for inheritance and fail to audition for love. I did it because your mother asked me to protect what mattered, and what mattered was not just land and money but the shape we make when we stand together. Alina's eyes hardened. This is coercion, she said. It's emotional blackmail through paperwork. I looked at her properly for the first time and realized how tired she was of me, how tired she had been for years. No, I said. Blackmail demands something you shouldn't have to give. This asks for something you should have given freely. Respect, care, presence. These are not exotic currencies. I paused. Also, if I had wanted to, I could have left everything to the dog shelter down the road and there would be no meeting today. You are here not because of what you deserve, but because of how much I still hope. Ethan's jaw worked. He tried on several faces and kept the one that looked like business. Let's be practical, he said. What would satisfy this condition? He made the words sound like mud on a shoe. Visiting hours? Weekly dinners? Sign-in sheets? We can systematize it. My laugh was soft, and it surprised even me. I don't want a swipe card at my door, I said. I don't want timesheets. I want you to look at me the way you look at an asset when you first consider investing in it. Carefully, seriously, with the understanding that value is partly numbers and partly trust. I want you to show up when nobody is watching and when there is nothing to gain. I want you to call me on days that are not holidays. I want you to consider that when I bring you a pot of dal, it is not a nuisance, but a love letter written in steam. The lawyer explained the mechanics, and there were mechanics. He spoke of a board I had formed. 3 people you would not guess. The nurse from the clinic, the teacher who had stayed late to help Jonah with chemistry twice a week long ago, and the old neighbor who knew the history of every gate on our lane. Their task was advisory. They would log evidence. They would keep a record for 2 more years. 2 years, not because I wanted to torture anyone, but because renewal takes time, and because change that arrives only for a week is performance, not love. At the end of those 2 years, and at the end of my life if it came sooner, I would sit with the record and decide. The outrage came in waves. This is insane. You're making us beg. You're letting strangers judge us. You're old and you're making things complicated. You changed. Every sentence was partly true and partly a wall. I listened. I nodded once, and then I spoke one final time. And the words were simple because I am old enough to know that simple words are the ones that stay. I did not change, I said. I returned to myself. I remembered the man your mother loved, and the way she would put her hand on my arm when we were too busy and say, "Look at me, I'm here." I also remembered the man you began to treat like a waiting room. I will not be a waiting room. I will be a home. Homes have conditions. The first is that people knock and enter with respect. Ethan stood. He paced to the window and stared out as if the city would counsel him. So if we do this, he said, turning around slowly, if we meet this condition, then what? He spat the last word like a fishbone. Then you will inherit not only money, I said, but also something worth more, a father's blessing. He rolled his eyes, but it was a weak roll, the eye of a man whose spin has slowed. Blessing doesn't pay taxes, he muttered. But it pays the bill your heart keeps running up, I said, and we looked at each other a long time. The meeting ended, because meetings end. Papers were signed the way thunder follows lightning, inevitably. Chairs scraped. The clock ticked. The lawyer stacked documents. My children filed out with different postures. Ethan with squared shoulders, Alina walking fast, Mara with a tight mouth, Jonah texting as his thumbs tried to stitch sense into a day that had resisted it. I stayed in the chair and looked at the dust in the sun and thought of rice washed until the water runs clear. I waited until the room had a simple sound again. The lawyer touched my shoulder as he left and said, "You did a hard good thing." I didn't answer. I didn't know if good things are good until much later. In the days that followed, there were attempted negotiations. Ethan called to suggest we clarify the governance. He offered a visiting schedule as a spreadsheet with color-coded blocks. I told him visiting blocks do not show love. They show compliance. He said compliance is the backbone of civilization. I said so is kindness. He asked me to define kindness. I asked him to come with me to the river and sit for an hour without looking at his phone. He did not come. Mara sent flowers with a long note about all the times she had been there in spirit. I sent her a short message. I need you in person. She replied with 3 heart emojis and then a voice note about a pitch she had to deliver. Jonah arrived at the house one night with a bottle of whiskey and a nervous grin. He hugged me and said, "So, old man, how do I earn back my fortune?" I poured tea and we sat and I told him, "By earning back your father." He listened longer than I expected. He asked me questions I had not heard from him in years. Do you sleep well? Do you get bored? What do you do on Sundays? His eyes were glassy when he left, and I didn't know if it was the whiskey or the fear or the small birth of something he would have to nurture if he wanted it to live. Weeks became months. The board sent me a note now and then, not a verdict, just a gentle report. Mara stopped by with soup and stayed for an hour. She listened more than she spoke. Jonah drove him to the clinic, sat through the checkup, asked the doctor good questions. Ethan mailed a new air purifier and a book on longevity. He has not visited. I did not keep score with marks on a wall. I kept it in the way the house changed its sound. There were days when the doorbell rang and I did not flinch. There were evenings when the gate code turned and I knew the person coming in would not steal my time and call it charity. There were mornings when I opened my eyes and felt a small arm of peace around my ribs. I did not decide these were true yet. I let them be mornings. One afternoon, the neighbor stepped into the courtyard and brought me a mango from his tree. He sat on the old swing and watched a bird try to land on the rim of a clay pot and fail and try again. "Children," he said, not looking at me, "are like that bird. They want to land, but they don't always know how to hold." I said, "Fathers are like that pot. We want to be landed on, but we break if we pretend we don't feel the weight." He laughed, and the sound was like a spoon tapping glass. "You still love them," he said. "That is your medicine." I nodded. "And my wound," I said. And we both smiled at how truth is often two-faced, and yet one thing. Ethan's anger settled into a professional chill. He sent legal questions through his advisor. He argued that the clause was vague. He argued that the trustee had a conflict of interest. He argued that good sons are often busy. The lawyer answered. "The law is a cold hallway, but it can lead to warm rooms if you insist." Alina stopped coming to family lunches. She said the air in my house gave her allergies. I did not tell her that grief is allergic to pride and that pride flares whenever it hears no. I bought a new plant. I learned its watering schedule. I learned the way its leaves would tilt toward the sun if I turned the pot. I named it after my wife. It was not her, but it was green, and it asked nothing but light and water. And then there were moments that were so small nobody in a movie would film them, but for me they were the real scene. Mara arrived one evening with a bag of groceries. She did not announce it online. She did not take a photo of her hands chopping garlic. She looked at the stove as if it were a piano and she could bear play. "You used to hum," she said suddenly, and her voice was not tight now. "When Mom cooked, you hummed." I stood there, the sound stuck in my chest like a bird that had flown too far. "I forgot," I said. "Hum now," she whispered, and I did, and the kitchen heard the old tune that says love is heavy and worth it. She cried quietly as the steam rose. Jonah, who had been the most careless with money and words, turned out to be the quickest to change because he had the least to defend. He began to come over on Saturdays to fix things that did not strictly need fixing. He patched a spot on the wall and cleaned the fan that made a tiny clicking noise and oiled the gate. He asked about my knees genuinely this time, and didn't offer a supplement brand in the next sentence. He took me to the river and we sat, and he put his phone on airplane mode without announcing it. "Do you think I can be different?" he asked. I said, "If you didn't think so, you wouldn't be here." He nodded like a man accepting both a compliment and a debt. Ethan took longer. Pride is an old oak. But one night it broke. He called me at 11 p.m. His voice was smaller than I remembered it. "Can I come?" he asked. I said yes, and I went to the gate and waited. He walked up the path in work clothes, and he stood in the doorway, and he didn't know where to put his hands. He looked around as if he had never really looked around. I've been so efficient, he said, and it sounded like a confession. I optimized everything, even you. He sat, and he took off his watch and put it on the table, as if it were a symbol he could remove. I made a list of everything I bought you in the last 2 years, he said. I thought it proved something. But when I read it, it just looked like a list. He looked at me the way he had long ago. I'm sorry, he said, and it was a small sentence loaded with furniture. We did not fix a lifetime in an hour. We did not fix it in a month. We didn't fix it at all. We began living it differently. And the board wrote their small notes. Ethan visited twice and stayed without checking his phone. He asked for stories about Mother. He listened. Mara took Father to the lake road. They ate corn with salt and laughed. Jonah attended the clinic again and argued with the pharmacist until the right dosage was given. These were not heroic acts. This was regular sunlight. This was the condition none of them had met because none of them had believed it mattered. It mattered. 2 years is both a blink and a book. I aged. My hair retired from the edges. My knees sounded like ignorant neighbors. My nights were sometimes too long, but my days were called by names again. Tuesday, when Ethan brings tea at 6. Thursday, when Mara makes that stew. Saturday, when Jonah pretends he's not crying at the old movies we used to watch with their mother. We spoke about her often. We didn't make her into a saint. We remembered her real, fierce, funny, impatient with nonsense, generous with her attention. We told the story of the time she taught us all to make kites and none of them flew, and she said, "So what?" We made wind. We put her shawl on the back of the couch, and yes, sometimes I touched it when nobody was looking. When the 2 years ended, there was no second dramatic meeting with a big table. There was a small one at my house. The lawyer came to the dining room where we once did homework. The board sat with plates of samosas. My children sat where they used to sit, by accident, muscle memory playing a gentle trick. The folder this time was different. It was thinner, but heavier. It contained fewer words, but each word was scored deeply with time. The lawyer looked around as if counting heads at a dinner, and then he said in a plain voice, "The condition has been met." He didn't make it a moment. He let the room make it a moment. Ethan closed his eyes. Alina looked at him with something like surprise and something like relief. Mara smiled without showing too many teeth, the way she did when she was small and had managed to finish a story after 3 tries. Jonah exhaled as if someone had been standing on his chest. I did not stand or deliver a speech. I poured tea. The trust's mechanics unlocked, and papers slid across the table, and signatures went down like polite rain. But the air in the room was not about signatures. The air had a warmth like bread. The assets would move in due time. I would still serve as trustee until my last day. They would inherit what the world measures, but they had already recovered what the heart measures. Later, when the plates were empty and the lawyer had gone, and the board had taken leftovers in foil because my wife taught everyone to do that, we sat with our cups, and the evening put itself around the house like a shawl. Ethan looked at me. "Thank you," he said, simple. Mara reached for my hand and didn't tuck hair behind her ear this time. Jonah leaned his head back and stared at the fan. "Old man," he said, smiling, "you trapped us." I smiled back. "No," I said. "I freed us. From thinking money can carry love like a courier. Money is a poor porter. Love carries itself. People like to say that conditions and wills are cruel. Perhaps some are. Perhaps some men write them to settle scores that should have been settled at dinner tables. Mine was a door. It was locked because the house was worth entering correctly. The key was not money-shaped. It was shaped like showing up, like listening, like washing 3 cups quietly when nobody asked you to, like getting out of your own way and remembering whose shoulders you stood on all those years you forgot to look down. I still miss my wife every morning the way a tree misses the bird that used to land on the same branch. But sometimes, often now, I see her in the way Ethan says, "I'll handle it," and then actually does. In the way Mara laughs without checking if someone is watching. In the way Jonah parks his phone face down and asks, "Tell me again about the summer of the power cuts." And in those moments, I put my hand on the back of the chair where she would have sat. And I say in my head, we kept the promise, love. We protected the heart. We didn't let the house be sold to hunger. Before you go, wherever you are, in that bus or that bed or that kitchen with the cardamom, remember this if you want to. Families don't take what's yours and tell you you're not welcome. They take what's yours and say, come in, sit. This is yours too. If your house is noisy with the wrong noise, make a quiet plan. You don't need a trust or a lawyer. You need a door and a key shaped like showing up. And if you're a child who has drifted, go home and knock. If you're a parent who has been turned into a waiting room, move the chairs back, open the curtains, and let the light in. A condition is sometimes nothing but a reminder that love has terms we all understand but pretend not to. Respect, care, presence. That's it. That's the whole investment. And if you've stayed with me to the end, do one thing for me now. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me one thing you're going to do for someone you love this week. And if this story moved you even a little, please like, share, comment, and subscribe so more people can hear it too.